have record keeping. And in your stack of presentations there, we also included duplication of benefits. We did that yesterday. We wanted to give you guys a copy of that today. Caroline is getting set up to start this training. So she'll be up here in just a moment. But once again, snacks are up here. I refreshed the candy. That seems to be a hit yesterday. Did everyone get a chance to sign in?
Thank you.
Microphone. So this is gonna click. Okay, so just click. Oops. Let me turn this off. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name's Caroline Kilbrennan, and I'm a grant manager, and I'll be working actually with and LSA. So, and this morning I'm going to walk through the environmental review process. I know that many of you, well, probably most of you will not actually be doing the environmental review, process, but actually what is the process of an environmental review? You know, we know that it's needed program, so whether, you know, it's whether we're doing, you know, we have to have an environmental review before we, you know, expand any kind of funding. So I'm going to walk through the whole process, not in great detail, but, you know, this is going to be a basic overview. And, you know, if you have any questions, hopefully I can answer them. I'm not an environmental scientist, of course, but hopefully it gives you kind of a basic idea. I know many of you, or actually most of you, will procure a contractor that's going to and get started. So this is a CDBG DR program, Introduction to Environmental Review. And let's get going. So with the introduction, so we have the general requirements that we're going to walk through. We have the environmental review overview. We have the environmental review process. We have the levels of reviews, so which, you know, we have the tiers. We have exempt. We have EIS, and I'll walk through all those with you. So there's different kinds of levels of review, which I'll walk through. And we have other requirements and considerations, which I'll walk through too. And so, environmental review process requirements in the CDBG-DR program. So general requirements. So we have the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, so NEPA. So that's just short, an acronym short for the National Environmental Policy, and we'll just talk about that in a minute. And then we have 24 CFR Part 58. Is the responsible, it is, that's who's going to be responsible. That's what Part 58 is. 24 CFR Part 51, that's environmental criteria. Management and protection of wetlands. So, and we'll walk through those a few slides. Process CDBG, DR funded project or activity and its potential impacts to the environment. So environmental reviews ensure proposed CDBG DR funded projects and activities do not negatively impact the surrounding environment, and that the project site itself, if applicable, will not have an adverse environmental or health effect on the end users, meaning, you know, to the public itself. So the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, and I hope I say that correctly, because sometimes, you know, hopefully. So, passed by Congress in January of 1970 in response to national consensus that federal agencies should take the lead in providing greater protection for the environment. So it requires that federal agencies to consider the environmental impact of the proposed actions early in the planning and decision-making process. So they want to make sure that the planning is done up front, that we are not going out there, building this big, you know, before we've done all the planning, you know, we take down forests, you know, when we haven't thought about it, kind of thing. So it encourages public participation and requires that all environmental review documents be made public to the, available to the public too. So 24 CFR Part 58. So this passes down HUD's responsibility to comply with NEPA to CDBG DR grantees, and in this case ADECA and its subrecipients. Okay, so that's what Part 58 is. And it also provides instructions, guidance, requirements for conducting environmental reviews for projects and activities. So everything in Part 58 will give you guidance, requirements for conducting environmental reviews for projects and activities. Okay? 24 CFR Part 51, so provides environmental standards, criterias, guidelines for determining projects' acceptability, and necessary mitigation measures to ensure that activities assisted by HUD achieve the goal of a suitable living environment. So that's Part 51. 55 provides standard criteria for guidelines for floodplain management, so like flood zones, you know, you have AE, you have V zones, and then the protection of wetlands also. Okay? So environmental review overview. So let's talk about the overview. What is an environmental review overview? So who is responsible for the environmental review? So you as subrecipients are. So subrecipients are responsible for performing environmental reviews for each CDBG-DR project and activity. So any project that you do, you have to do an environmental review, no matter what. So if you're doing a $500 project, we need an environmental review. If you're doing a $5 million infrastructure project, we need an environmental review. Okay? So no matter what, we need a review. Whether it's exempt, it doesn't matter. We have to have that documentation, so you have to be in compliance. And of course, the person that you procure as your contractor should, of course, know this and, you know, is going to guide you. And of course, your grant managers, so, you know, and then, of course, ADECA. If you have any questions about anything, they will be able to, you know, assist you. And I'm sure some of you, you know, I know some of you have already done some CDBG work before. So what has to be, so environmental reviews are required for all CDBG DR funded projects and activities, regardless of the funding amount. So where? So environmental reviews are completed on a project by project basis, and they evaluate the environmental impacts at the site of the CDBG DR investment. So you're tearing down, if you want to say you have an old school building that you want to to, like, I know Brian asked me about one the other week. They have an old school building, they may want to change it to to a community building, Brian, was it? So we know that, did you need some? Sorry.
No, the microphone keeps cutting out.
Oh, does it? I'm sorry.
No, it's not. I think that it was dying yesterday, so let's just use the lapel mic because I think this has a full battery.
Okay.
So if you want to, you can either clip it to you.
Can you all hear me okay? Yeah?
You can hold it or clip it to you, or maybe you can even put it down. I don't know if it'll pick it up.
Yeah, so you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Okay, it's picking you up.
Okay, so Brian had a question the other week when we have our check-in meeting. He has an old, they have in Baldwin County, they have an old school building that they want to use as maybe as a community building. So that building will definitely have to have an environmental review. So whether it comes to fruition for Baldwin County, we don't know yet. It just depends on a lot of circumstances for Baldwin County. But it will definitely need, first and foremost, an environmental review. You know, there's a lot of other, you know, factors that will go into it, but, you know, it will definitely need that environmental review before we do anything for Baldwin County at that site, of course. So environmental reviews must be performed before any funds, regardless of source, are committed to the project, right? So before we use any kind of money at all, that environmental review has to be performed. So why? So environmental reviews are meant to ensure the proposed CDBGD funded projects or activities do not negatively impact that environment, right? So we want to make sure it's not going to have an adverse effect on, you know, the surrounding area, the public, you know, the human factor. You know, just like if we want to tear down a building, we want to make sure there's no, you know, asbestos, lead-based paint, for instance. You know, we want to say that building that Brian has, it's an old school building. I don't know how old it is, but say it has lead-based paint or asbestos. We want to make sure that we mitigate for that before we, you know, so there's a lot of factors that would go into that. So we have to think about that too. So, how? So environmental reviews are performed by the subrecipient and completed as per ADECA's environmental review program, which can be found at the following link. So we are going to follow ADECA's environmental review policies. So you will all have this link. So, you know, once we get started in these programs, you know, we're going to follow ADECA's policies, procedures, as we move forward. Okay? Any questions on those? Are we all good? So why are environmental reviews important? So they ensure that HUD-funded projects provide decent, safe, and sanitary housing and living conditions and communities. They ensure projects do not have a negative impact on the environment and that the environment is not impacting projects. They promote active mitigation planning early in the program and the design process. So, you know, we can get in there, we can mitigate early, and, you know, we can get this process done. And then they also allow stakeholders and residents to participate in the planning. So, you know, in this case, you know, say that you have a, you know, one of the counties want to build a road through, you know, one of the counties, and it's going to take down some nice area of woodlands or whatever, you know, they can say no. They can say, hey, no, I don't want this. You know, you're not taking down this area. This is, you know, a nice walking area. So they have that, you know, but also it can be like, well, this is going to, you know, cut out, you know, 30 minutes commute for me to get to, you know, Mobile or wherever I'm going to. So, you know, there's pros and cons. So that's why we do this. So this is why, you know, we have these planning meetings and we bring these up. So, so this is why the, you know, these environmental reviews and these planning processes are, you know, really important to have. Okay. So an overview of an environmental review. So the environmental review process is required for, as we know, for which I'm going to say a lot. so is required for every CDBGDR funded project and activity, regardless of the funding amount. So we know it can be $2, $28 million. It doesn't matter, right? Funded project and activity, regardless of the funding amount. Activity type, included but not limited to. So development of local recovery plans, which you're all doing right now. So you're all in this process of developing these plans, which is exciting. You know, so public services, so housing, rehab and construction, business loans, grants, public facilities, big infrastructure projects. So it doesn't matter, right? So, you know, whatever we're doing, any kind of project, so it doesn't matter what we're doing. We, you know, whether you're going to be exempt, which we'll go over, or whether we're going to need an EIS statement, which is an environmental impact statement, which is huge. environmental review. So it doesn't matter. We have to have one. Okay, so choice limited actions. So subrecipients cannot commit or spend CDBG, DR, or other sources of funds on any activity that could have an adverse environmental impact or limit the choice of reasonable alternatives prior to completion, or have an environmental review once a project has become federal. So again, this prohibition on choice limited action prohibits physical activity including acquisition, rehab, construction, as well as contracting for committing to any of these actions. So once it becomes federal, you know, environmental has to be done. So who is the responsible entity? So the subrecipients is for the environmental review process. So the responsible entity certifying officer. So I'm going to ask for a little help here. Tyler.
Yeah.
Responsible entity certifying officer. So subrecipient designated official, example, chief elected official, mayor, county chairman, who evaluates the environmental review, who is responsible for that scope? Who would they choose? I mean, wouldn't it be somebody that has actual environmental background?
Well, the first thing is, for the entitlements, do you already have a responsible entity? You already have somebody signing your environmental reviews?
Yes.
Okay. And then what about Baldwin? Do you have somebody who already signs do you ever do federal NEPA environmental reviews?
Sure, highway does.
It'll be contracted through highway department.
Would it? Okay.
And so somebody, well, and let me ask, for those of you who do have an RE, the certifying officer, what is their position, title?
I was a director.
Yeah. So it can be, you just have to designate it. Isn't there a form you like to say, this is my RE or my CO?
Oh, okay, so does ADECA have, okay, so they would have a form that they would, okay.
And,
Okay, so we would have to look at that. We will check and make sure. Okay.
yeah, at the end of the day, you're designating somebody who's ultimately, for lack of a better word, legally responsible
Yes.
for certifying that the environmental is true and correct. Now, somebody else may have prepared it, but that person's taking the liability.
So ADECA has a pretty comprehensive website on their environmental review process. What we wanted to do here is give you a basic overview of environmental reviews, but they have a presentation on their website of like going really in depth on their process and how to do it. They have all of their forms out there linked, so you can download them for any and all of your needs. I have reviewed all of that, and it's very comprehensive. I can tell you. So they do discuss all of this there as well. So we just wanted to give you a basic overview. Your chief elected official, I mean, I think would be, in my experience, it has been like a mayor of a city or the county commissioner or president of county, whatever it is that the highest, the elected official is, that would sign documents, that has the signature authority. So sometimes it's a city manager as well. I have seen that too. So, but that would be your certifying officer on that.
Okay. Well, good. All right. Well, thanks. Okay, so whoever you elect for your certifying officer. Okay. Oops. So key stakeholders. So we have key stakeholders in this program as we move forward, right? So our key stakeholders, of course, are the subrecipients, which is you guys, the responsible entity that assumes the authority and legal responsibility to perform the environmental reviews for the CDBG DR funded projects and activities. And then we have the stakeholders and residents. And it depends on the level of the review. So may be consulted during the process to provide public comments and objections as we said, depending on what kind of project you are doing, large infrastructure projects, of course, I'm sure they're going to be definitely consulted on, and it's going to be out there for public comments and objections. Small, and then ADECA, issues the notice of release of grant funds, the NRGC, if required, prior to executing the CDBGD activity or project, monitors the subrecipients for compliance and provides technical assistance, and then HUD, who monitors ADECA for compliance and provides technical assistance. So those are your key stakeholders in this program. So true or false, environmental reviews only need to be performed for CDBG DR funded projects that involve construction. False. Good job. That's right. False. All right. False. So the environmental review process. So we're going to define the scope of project and activity. We're going to determine the level of review. We're going to create the environmental review record, perform the environmental review, and execute the project activity. So you're going to define the scope, determine the level, create the environmental review, perform, and execute. So the project description should include all completed actions that are a composite part of the project and aggravated activities defined in a single scope. So you're going to capture the maximum scope of the proposal, not just the activity. So not just the CDBG DR money, and not tied directly to the line items. So in other words, so what we're going to do is, so we have the project purpose. So what it should be is the project purpose. So what are you going to do? Okay, so what is your project? So project location, including parcel and size, existing conditions, proposed scope of work, changes to land structure, summary of beneficiaries, number and type, benefits of impact to the community, funding sources, total project cost and HUD share. So project purpose. So what are you going to do? So are you going to build, a bridge? Is it going to, project location? Is it over water? What are the existing conditions? Did the bridge come down during the storm? The proposed scope, work, changes to the land structure. How many people are going to benefit? Is it going to benefit thousands of people? Is it going to benefit the community? Is it just going to be CDBG money, or is it going to have other sources of money to it? Total cost. Is this going to be, $10 million? And so that's, that's the project description, and it should include all the following. So determine the level of the review. So here we have the levels of review. So using ADECA's level of the review determination form. So this is the ENV LRD. So this can be found on ADECA's website. So you're going to determine the level of the environmental review. So is it exempt? Is it categorically excluded, not subject to 58.5? Is it categorically excluded, subject to 58.5? Does it need an environmental assessment, an EA? Does it need an environmental impact statement, an EIS? Or is it a tiered environmental review, meaning many together? And we'll go over these in a few slides down. So the environmental review record, the ERRs, we call them for short, documents the environmental review was completely, so each ERR must describe all activities that are part of the project. So it evaluates all effects of the project on the human environment. Is it in compliance with 2458.5 and 58.6? It should document all the findings and contain all viable sources of documents and relevant based data. So you know, it should be in compliance. It should have all the authorities, you know, applicable authorities of 24, 5.8, 5.6 on there. So ERRs are living documents until the completion of the project, and they can be updated. So you may need to re-record, say medication measures. Say you working on a building, you had to tear down a wall, you found asbestos, so you have to now go in there, update the ERR, because now you have to mitigate that asbestos, abate that asbestos. You know, you can change in scope of work. Now you need to do a change order because you found more work that needed to be done. You may need to reevaluate the impact of the project, environmental impacts discovered during construction, addition to another funding source. Say, you know, you had the CDBG money, but then another funding source came through. Maybe it's, you never know your luck, right? Came through and said, hey, we've got another $2 million for you somewhere else. So you have to make sure that, you know, this is all document on this environmental document. So performing the environmental review. The level of review will determine the level of effort necessary to complete the environmental review. Exempt it's a simple document. So the more complex the project, the more extensive and time-consuming the environmental review. You make sure the environmental review contains all documentation related to the environmental review to demonstrate compliance. You know, environmental impact statement is normally a very large document because you're impacting the environment. So it's going to be much more extensive. So here we have what we call the levels of environmental reviews. So as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels of review right here. And we have exempt. So we have exempt, we have exempt, and then we have what we call categorically exempt, not subject to 5.8.6. Then we have categorically exempt, subject to 58.6 and 58.5. We have environmental assessment needed, subject to 58.6, 58.5, and need per analyst. So, and then we have the environmental impact statement subject to 58.6, 58.5, and then the need per analyst and the environmental impact statement procedures. So that the bottom one is the most complex. You know, an environmental scientist, people that are probably, I mean, you know, obviously know what they do, and probably, you know, somebody that has experience is going to perform, you know, probably the bottom two, definitely, you know, that has that knowledge to, you know, perform those environmental reviews would definitely be needed. So let's, okay, so only after the environmental review is completed and signed by the certifying officer can the project begin. So once the environmental review is completed, it's been signed, and everything is good, can that project begin? In some cases, a notice of release of grant funds must be issued by ADECA before CDBG, DR, and other funds can be expanded on that project. So if the environmental review yielded actions to mitigate adverse environmental effects, remember to implement and document those actions. So sometimes, you know, you do the environmental review, but you may have some you may have some actions to do before you can start, you know, work on those projects. You know, even in simple, like even on, you know, like the homeowner's side, You may go to a home and, do an environmental review, but they may have some stuff that you need to mitigate first before you can go and actually do work on that homeowner's house. I know, like, just one case, we had a homeowner that had 200 barrels of diesel fuel in his yard, but before we could even work on his house, we had to remove those 200 barrels of diesel fuel before we could reconstruct his home, because it was a danger, having all those barrels of diesel fuel. So that's just one case of many. Okay, so test your knowledge. The environmental review record, ERR, should only be completed for environmental assessments, EA, and environmental impact statements, EIS. Good job. That's right. False. So the environmental review record, ERR, is required for every level of review and is a key to demonstrate compliance to ADECA and for HUD for every CDBG-DR funded project. Good job. So level of review. So I'm just going to talk about the levels of review real quick. So we have exempt, we have C-A-N-S-T, C-E-S-T, E-A, EIS, and tiered. So exempt activities, so overview. So exempt activities are mainly activities that do not have a physical component. So these will include kind of what you're doing now. So environmental planning, engineering, design cost, information and financial services, administration planning, public services, stuff that don't have any physical impact. So inspections, technical assistance, and training, right? So they have no physical impact. So these are what we classify as exempt. So forms required. So of course you will need an environmental review record, and you would complete and sign a level of review determination, which is an ENV, LRD, other requirements checklist, which would be the ENV, ORC, and finding of an exempt form, which is the ENV FOE forms, and these can all be found on ADECA's website, which is right here for you, and you have. Okay? So that's your exempt form. So what kind of activities are exempt?
Yeah, public service,
That's right.
admin, planning.
Right? Yeah. Financial, yeah. Good job. So categorically excluded, not subject to 58.5 CNST. So overview. So CNST activities are like exempt activities and generally do not have a physical impact on the environment. So some of these activities are like tenant-based, rental assistance, supportive services, operating cost, maintenance, economic development activities, not associated with construction, of course, some types of home buyer assistance, mortgage assistance, affordable housing, pre-development cost. Okay? So forms needed for these is so the environmental review record would be completed and signed ADECA, the CNST, the environmental review form, and other required ADECA forms and notices, supporting documents, example maps, or airport zones, floodways, and etc. And then there's your link, of course, right here. You all have these forms, right? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so categorically excluded subject to 58.5. So CEST overview. So CEST activities will likely have a physical impact. Okay, so examples of these are like acquisition, leasing, or disposition of vacant land or existing buildings with no change in the land use, acquisition, leasing of public facilities with no change in land use, removal of barriers that restrict mobility, accessibility to the elderly and handicapped, rehab, reconstruction of water sewer systems, rehab, reconstruction of streets and sidewalks. So they will have a physical impact. So you need to do, so this one's a little bit more. Okay, so we have a little bit, so it's getting a little bit more information here. So it's an environmental review record, so the ERR. So you would complete and sign the ADECA CEST environmental ERR form and other required document forms. So here's all the information, supporting documents, maps, airport zones, floodways, SHPO clearance if needed, notice of intent to request to release of funds, not required if it converts to exempt, which, you know, of course, the environmental officer will review. Proof of publication, which will go over. Authority to use grant forms, which is form 7015.16, and then notice of removal of grant conditions, and links all there for you at the bottom. Okay, so here we go with the actual environmental assessment. So the EA, so overview, the activities that cannot be categorized as exempt. So we can't categorically exclude it. It requires an environmental assessment. So these include large-scale infrastructure, new construction, reconstruction of public facilities, construction or reconstruction of multifamily housing, buildings, etc. So it cannot be excluded. So it's going to need an environmental assessment, okay? So environmental review record is in compliance with 24 CFR 58.5 and 58.6. So it has to be in compliance with CFR 58.5, 58.6. Impact analysis and EA factors. So all these, so the ER determinations, FONSI, are findings of significant findings. So published FONSI notice and non-RROF. So conduct public comment period, respond accordingly. So proof of publication, so for public comments, a notice of release of grant funds from ADECA form. So all this information, I know a lot of information for you right there. And then the largest one would be the environmental impact statement. So the environmental impact statement required, so the ER concludes that there is a finding of significant impact to the environment. So the complexity of the projects exceeds the environment of the EA. So it's extraordinary circumstances. So an example here would be more than 2,500 housing units. Another example I can think of, which I saw, was one was where they took a forest out to build a power plant, and that was another one. That's a huge impact statement. So it's not really for a CDBG, but it was an impact statement, just period. So, and what would be needed? Everything, right? So if that happened, you know, you would need everything previously, right, for that. All documentation required, and then also the environmental impact statement. So if you were building multifamily, more than 2,500 units plus, I mean, or more, well, definitely would need an impact statement. Okay. So anybody have any questions on the tiers, on those? Well, we have one more. So these are the tiered reviews. So the tiered reviews allows combining similar activities project into a tiered review to reduce repetitive discussions of the same issues. And this is normally done like in single family rehab programs like the HRAP, so in the single family programs that Alabama's doing. So, and then also demolition. So, okay. So a tier 1 is a broad review for a larger geographic area, addressing general compliance with laws and authorities, including notice of intent to reduce release of funds and supporting documents. And then they do the tier 2, which is site specific. So they do it on the individual parcel. You know, they do the tier 2 review, and that's normally a desktop review that they do. Okay, so they'll do the broad review on the tier 1 for the whole geographic area, and then they do the single review, tier 2, for the single parcel. Okay, for the single family process. Okay. All right. So okay, I'm going to give you a few minutes, and I'm going to test your knowledge. Okay. So fill in the blank.
And this is a best fit. Some of them can go in multiple, so.
Yes.
Yeah. The first one would be exempt.
No cheating.
Yes, no cheating. No turning the page. Or is it on the same page?
Classes to do that, so.
No cheats here.
No, the answers are on the
Okay, are we all good? Are we all going to get an A plus? Okay, let's look. All right, so did we all get it right? Local recovery plan would be exempt, right? So large scale, multi-building projects, it definitely would be an EIS, right? So lease of public facilities, well, that would be categorically excluded, subject to like single family housing rehab, tiered that we just talked about. That would be large scale infrastructure project, EA, depending on, you know, if it affected something else. And then home buyer assistance program, categorically excluded, not subject to, right? Did you all get those right? Yeah? Oh. Sure you did. Sure. Okay. So other requirements and considerations. So let's look at the 58.5, the statutory checklist. So these are just some of the other considerations that we have to, you know, that they'll think about. You know, we have this historic properties, which will go to SHPO if, you know, so again, I'll just use Brian. So this schoolhouse, say it's 100 years old. I don't even know how old. They make them go to SHPO sometimes. You know, sometimes it's 50 years old. It blows my mind. But anyway, you know, it'll have to go to SHPO, you know, which means, you know, they got to approve, or do they approve certain building materials, you know, does it have to be this building material? You know, they want this building material. So historic properties have to go here to SHPO. And then we have floodplain management and wetland protection, you know, and then coastal management zone. Sole source aquas, endangered species, wild and scenic rivers, air quality, farmland protection, noise and abatement, control airports, you know, which they'd never thought about when they built Heathrow Airport, I assure you. Toxic hazardous substances, explosives, see, there again, explosives and flammable hazards. My guy with his 200, 300 barrels of diesel fuel. And then environmental justice, right? So that's your statutory checklist. I can hardly say that. Okay, so then you have your public comment period length. So notice of intent, which is the NOI. So categorically exempt, subject to, and then environmental assessment, and then environmental impact statement is 7 days when publishing or 10 days when mailing and posting. Combined notice of findings of no significant impact, FONSI, notice of intent, environmental only is 15 days when publishing or 18 days when mailing and posting. So those are your public comment period lengths. And then your unified federal review, subrecipients may adopt reviews of other federal agencies. So if a review's already been done, an environmental review by another agency, the entire EA must be maintained in the project file, and scope of the original ERR must be fully covered that HUD-funded scope. Subrecipients interested in the UFA should consult with ADECA to ensure compliance. So if someone's already done the ER, it fully covers the scope, you may use it, but you need to talk with ADECA first. And this came about, I believe, because of Hurricane Sandy, right, Tyler? The UFR, I think it came about because of Hurricane Sandy, but using the scope of work of another agency, yeah,
Oh, right.
yeah. But anyway, yeah, but I think you should, I think UFR came about because of Hurricane Sandy, using another agency's environmental review, if it's fully completed and covers the scope.
Yeah, and I think the reason why that came up is if you're doing like match projects and you've already completed the environmental review with FEMA, and
Yeah.
you're bringing in DR to the match, HUD said you don't have to redo the environmental review process for that 5%.
Right. Yeah, but I would check with ADECA, yeah, on whether it's acceptable on that. Okay, and then of course we cannot forget lead. So 24 CFR Part 35 lead hazard. So we know that lead is highly toxic metal that may cause a range of health problems, especially in young children. Lead primarily comes from lead-based paint used before 1978. All housing must comply with lead-based paint regulations, so we know it has to be mitigated. Required notifications, so all housing programs applicants must receive a lead hazard information pamphlet, a notice of lead hazard evaluation if applicable, and a notice of lead hazard reduction activity if applicable. So if you're doing housing, you have to do that. So lead hazard assessment evaluation, so must be conducted on all housing units eligible for rehab, built before 1978, includes visual assessment, paint testing, and risk assessment, must be conducted by a qualified professional. Hazard reduction includes paint stabilization, interim controls, standard treatments, or abatement, and conducted by it has to be a qualified professional. So, and then of course asbestos. So asbestos has been used, as we know, as a fire retardant installation in homes, and when disturbed, the fibers can cause lung disease, the risk of lung disease in people. So all rehab and demolition projects must follow the national emission standards for hazards, for air pollutants regulations, for asbestos. So an asbestos survey must be completed before repair and demolitions. Asbestos surveys may be required based on the building type, activity to evaluate for asbestos contamination. So asbestos service may be certified by the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, or the Alabama Public Health Division of Community Environmental Protection. Okay. And that is it. And there's some links for you. And that is it for environmental review. So thank you. Any questions?
We've got monitoring. We've got monitoring up next. Let's get that.
Does
pulled
anybody
up.
need a break? We just keep going? There's only two trainings left today, monitoring and then record keeping.
I think environmental review was our longest
Yeah.
today, so the last two are pretty quick. So if you guys want to take a break, we can. We can keep going.
You want a coffee break?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
let's take a 10-minute break.
Okay.
Did the mic thing get fixed?
Yeah, so it's the lapel mic that's right there. You can, I think it picks you up. So long as you keep it right there, it will pick up.
So I don't have to do anything? Okay. Okay. All right, good morning, everyone. Did you miss me? I missed you. So we're going to talk about monitoring. So again, kind of same format here as we do all of these. We'll go over, do the overview and the requirements. Then we'll talk about the frequency of monitoring events, the different types of monitoring, and the process overall. This is not revolutionary monitoring we're doing here. It's pretty much modeled after what HUD does and what CDBG DR grantees do all across the country. Okay. So monitoring regulations are all over the place. In case you were curious why ADECA monitors its subrecipients. First at 492.24, of course, CFR 570, that's the CDBG regs. This is verbatim, requires ADECA to make reviews and audits, including on-site reviews of subrecipients to meet the requirements of the Housing and Community Development Act. Then in 2 CFR 200, 332D, requires ADECA to monitor the activities of subrecipients as necessary to ensure that the subaward is used for authorized purposes in compliance with federal statutes, regulations, and the terms and conditions of the subrecipient agreement, and that subrecipient agreement performance goals are achieved. So go ahead and take a look at 200.332. That's the whole section on what 2 CFR 200 says about ADECA's obligation with respect to subrecipients. So we already talked about 2 CFR 200 and 24.570, obviously the Federal Register notices, and then your subrecipient agreement itself will discuss all of the monitoring requirements that apply to you. If you haven't had enough, 2 CFR 200 337A also says that HUD OIG, Comptroller General of the United States, and of course ADECA, must have the right to access documents, papers, other records which are pertinent to the award in order to conduct monitoring and audits. So we talked about this yesterday, and that right does include the ability to interview your personnel to talk about the documents, get context, things like that. So these are pertinent because the previous regulations said ADECA has the right to monitor, and this says ADECA during those events has the right to look at documents and also interview staff. So, generally speaking, I'll just say, monitoring is not a gotcha type exercise. It's not meant to like, yeah, you're in trouble now. It really is meant to prevent you from getting in trouble or prevent you from having to repay funds. And which, again, we said yesterday, that's not something ADECA or HUD would wants. So when we come out to monitor, we do want to have an open and transparent conversation with you so that we can identify if there are any issues, and if so, how we can work to rectify them together. The last thing you want is for an issue to go undiscovered or unresolved, ultimately to be found out when it's too late. Okay? So we want to work with you is what we're trying to say. So what's the difference between a monitoring and an audit? Monitoring refers to the review of a subrecipient's DR-funded activities for the purpose of identifying instances of noncompliance and correcting or remedying those instances. So that's kind of what I just said. We want to find if there's an issue and try to get ahead of it. An audit refers to an independent evaluation and other reviews of the subrecipient's funded activities conducted by third parties to ensure they're operating compliantly, economically, efficiently, and effectively. So monitoring the relationship between a grantee and a subrecipient is a partnership. And so both ADECA and a subrecipient are referred to in 2 CFR 200 as what's called a pass-through entity, which means that HUD places requirements on ADECA. ADECA passes those requirements down to the subrecipient. And then you likewise could do the same if you had sub-tier subrecipients. But in that pass-through relationship, at the end of the day, ADECA ultimately is responsible for everything you do. So ADECA wants you to do well because it wants to do well, right? So that's why a monitoring is kind of this, let's work together to get this resolved. And an audit is, a third-party contractor who kind of just comes in and said, hey, here's your problems, fix them. And so it's just a little bit of a different lens. Audit also almost always is looking at, financial transactions, things like that. But it does have that regulatory component, like we discussed yesterday. So, slight difference. All right, so monitoring is the principal means by which ADECA and HUD ensure that programs and technical areas are carried out efficiently, effectively, and in compliance with applicable laws and regulations. The monitoring event itself will include a review of policies, procedures, and records to determine if the funded activities are compliant with all requirements. So yesterday we talked about the importance of written policies and procedures, the difference between a policy and a procedure, right? So the policy is this is the requirement. The procedure is this is the who, what, when, how, and why, right? We accomplish or fulfill or meet that policy or requirement. So you'll have to have policies and procedures that govern your processes, and you'll have to have records available and staff available to show and demonstrate that you're compliant with your policies and procedures. And the policies and procedures themselves are compliant with the requirements. So kind of just looking at a high level roles and responsibilities. Again, I said at the end of the day, ADECA is responsible for everything that its subrecipients and everybody below the lower tiers, ultimately administer, implement everything you do. But it starts with HUD. So HUD monitors all CDBG-DR funded programs and activities implemented by ADECA and its subrecipients. So most of the time, HUD is monitoring ADECA. And when it monitors ADECA, it'll also monitor ADECA's subrecipients. I mean, most certainly. But it not necessarily is HUD saying, hey, we're going out to Baldwin, we want to talk to them directly. They can, and I'm not saying they won't, but almost always it's just working with ADECA. And so what happens is, and this is true for, when ADECA comes out to monitor you as well, and we'll go over this in a moment, HUD sends a letter that says, this is what we're going to come out and review. So HUD may say, we're coming out, ADECA, in a few months, and we want to just look at HRAP. And so if that's the case, then we know we're not going to have to contact any of you all because HUD isn't going to be monitoring you that time. But they may say, oh, and we want to look at your, HH-MIDS, housing programs. Or we want to look at, just Mobile City or whatever it is. So we'll know ahead of time what they're going to monitor, and then we'll begin to communicate with you to make sure that you're all ready to be kind of on call should HUD request something that we don't have on file, for example. There'll be plenty of time to prepare for all of that, but just kind of keep that in the back of your head that when HUD comes and monitors ADECA, you may be looped in if HUD wants to take a look at what you're doing. But otherwise, the times that you're going to be participating in monitoring events are when ADECA is monitoring you. And so HUD's not even in the picture. And so ADECA is just monitoring you as the grantee and you being their subrecipient. And so that's what that kind of middle box there is. The third one is you as the subrecipient, you do need to be monitoring your contractors, your consultants. You do need to be monitoring yourselves kind of like internally, making sure that you are following your policies and procedures. And then if you do elect to have a sub-tier subrecipient, you are also responsible for monitoring them. So HUD will regularly monitor ADECA and its subrecipients and contractors. I think it's about 2 times a year, maybe, and then eventually one. HUD tracks ADECA's responsibility to monitor subrecipients and contractors through information entered by ADECA with DRGR, the Disaster Recovery Grant Reporting System. there's a requirement in the Federal Register that ADECA enter into DRGR once a quarter how many monitoring and technical assistance events it conducted in that particular quarter. And it also has to say whether or not any findings or concerns were issued. So one thing that the, ADECA's HUD rep, has the ability to do is go and take a look at who ADECA has monitored and how they're performing, and or if they haven't monitored them, right? So it's not a you just want to be mindful that ADECA has to report to HUD what it's doing, and HUD will have access to that information. And it may or may not inform who they want to monitor. Oftentimes, unless there's some serious issue that's identified, which we don't anticipate, most often HUD is concerned and wants to monitor slow spenders, those who are not performing because of this expenditure deadline. Okay, HUD can identify subrecipients and contractors that require monitoring. I said this, based off of the data that ADECA is required to enter and report. So that's HUD. Now the overview of ADECA monitoring. It's not limited to just a one-time event, but it's an ongoing process that assesses performance over the life of the subrecipient agreement, and it involves continuous communication and evaluation. So, the events are point-in-time events, but it's, it's across the board. You want to have an open line of communication with your grant manager. Again, it's a partnership. And so if over time, you report, like if you're in your progress reports and your spending reports, you're not showing spending, your grant manager may say, what's going on? And you may say, oh, well, we had a problem with the contractor. It looks like there's, there may have been some fishy stuff going on, or we're held up in environmental review, or, we haven't hired for that position yet. There's any number of reasons, just through regular communication, that, for better or for worse, is going to reveal concerns. And it's in those instances that your grant manager may say, okay, well, we have to come out and monitor, period. We're going to go ahead and monitor those areas for those reasons. And that's not a bad thing, but it's just, that open line of communication informs all parties, so that ADECA and your grant managers can support you in your recovery efforts. So it aims to assist subrecipients with improving performance, capacity, and avoid or remedying instances of noncompliance. So again, when we talk about monitoring, it's not what's wrong from a compliance perspective and how can we write you up, but it's how can we help you succeed. I really mean that. Everything you hear me saying is, are there delays? Is it a staffing issue? What can we do to get you in a position where you're performing at your highest potential? And then, of course, provides a means to offer technical assistance for existing or upcoming changes to, requirements or regulations. So technical assistance is one of our main jobs. We need to be here for you and help you navigate, the regulatory environment successfully, so that we can all succeed. So technical assistance is a daily thing, but it's also, as when we come out to monitor, on-site or remotely, we're always going to ask to, unless we already know, what technical assistance do you need while we're there. And this, again, is just your requirements. You need to monitor your own programs, your own internal departments and divisions, look at your finances, and then also any sub-tier subrecipients and your consultants, your contractors. So that's one thing, monitor your own portfolio, but then also in operations. But the second B here is to prepare and participate in ADECA and HUD monitoring events. All right, so true or false? Subrecipients must make documents available for review during monitoring events, but subrecipient staff interviews are optional. Yeah. So, not that this would ever be a problem, but subrecipients must also provide timely and reasonable access to staff for interviews and discussion. Why it's important is because, and I'm this type of person where you get handed a bunch of documents and you're kind of flipping through them and you're like, gosh, it's not adding up, or I can't make sense of this. And if you're able just to get an explanation, you're like, oh, okay, now I get it. There is no problem here, you explained it to me. So the verbal, again, especially, this is the type of person I am. My colleagues can attest to it. I need to have a conversation in order to learn and understand what's going on. So it's actually beneficial. All right, so now we're going to talk about the frequency of ADECA monitoring you as the subrecipient. Each year, ADECA will develop an annual monitoring plan that will identify all the monitoring events that's going to take place during that year. So ADECA has the 3 HH-MIDs. It has 2 nonprofit subrecipients, ACCA and LSA. And then eventually when the competitions get underway, there'll be several other local governments, counties, potential other types of government or nonprofit, but nonetheless, the most impacted and distressed, the other areas that were hit. So right now it's a portfolio of 5, and that could grow, 2 or 3 times. So each year, ADECA will develop, who's getting monitored, whether it's on-site or remote, and what they're going to take a look at, which is basically what that second bullet says right there. Okay, so how often will you be monitored? Every subrecipient will receive at least 1 monitoring a year after you begin to spend money. And it could be on-site or remote. So once a year is what you should plan for. These are the reasons why you may have to get monitored more than once in any particular year. If you have past or slow performance or spending, we'll probably want to come out again and say, what can we do to help? If you have unresolved open findings that are not getting resolved in a timely manner, if there are capacity concerns, so that's either staffing levels or just maybe a general sense that compliance across the board is not achieving high-level benchmarks. If you have particularly complex projects, again, that might be a reason why we want to come out and get ahead of what may eventually lead to issues. If you have large awards or multiple projects occurring at the same time, again, that might be a reason why we want to come out and take a look again, just to make sure that all projects are being compliantly administered and implemented. If HUD, OIG, or others decide they need to come out and monitor or audit, that would trigger maybe another monitoring, of course. And then finally, if you're getting citizen complaints. So if citizens are saying, hey, there's slow processing, or I feel that I was discriminated against, or I don't have access to information, or whatever there's potential fraud, waste, and abuse I've observed. If there's, and all citizen complaints, by the way, and this is in the next series of trainings, you're kind of innocent until proven guilty, of course, but they're investigated. But nonetheless, if you're getting citizen complaints, ADECA has an obligation to come take a look, right? Okay, so once a year, maybe more. And again, it might be on-site or remote. I would imagine, although this is not hard and fast, that like the first monitoring event would likely be on-site. It just helps the grant manager become familiar with your office, your staff, your processes. There's always value to meeting in person, but that's not necessarily, it may be remote. All right, so types of monitoring events. So there's 4 listed here: on-site, remote, financial, and closeout. We're currently working on finalizing ADECA's monitoring manual. So this might be subject to change. The 2 that you're always going to have are either on-site or remote. When it comes to these kind of financial specific monitorings or closeout monitorings, those may or may not be included as official monitoring events. So I'll show you in just a second. The on-site versus remote are very straightforward. On-site is going to happen on-site. Remote or desk monitoring means that ADECA, you'll still get a letter, we'll still pick a time. It's going to start on Monday and end on Friday, but the whole thing happens like via Zoom, right? So we're not actually coming out. What we'll do is we'll say, these are the programs we're looking at, here's the checklist we're going to use. Go ahead and send us the documents ahead of time. We'll put a bunch of calendar meetings on everybody's Outlook calendars. The process will be exactly the same. We won't be physically there. And just as a reminder, ADECA reserves the right to perform more than one on-site and/or remote monitoring if based off of past performance. An additional monitoring is warranted. All right, so these other two, financial capacity monitoring, this is something that we may or may not end up doing, but the financial capacity monitoring is a monitoring event conducted of subrecipients once ADECA completes the first DRGR drawdown. So once you spend that very first dollar and request reimbursement and ADECA pays it, there may be an instant monitoring, which is really meant to just make sure that your financial processes are established and in place. So now that you're actually spending money, and usually these are remote, let's take a look and make sure your financial policies and procedures, your accounting records, all that stuff we talked about yesterday, is that appropriately established and operating properly? And again, the idea there is just to kind of get ahead of it. This may or may not occur, so just FYI. And then closeout monitoring. This, will just be folded out into the overall closeout process. One day, years from now, you'll actually get to close out these subrecipient agreements after you're all done. And one thing that has to happen is we need to make sure all your ducks in a row, all the documents are stored, retained, all your invoices are paid, and all the records, whatever needs to be reported and transmitted to ADECA has happened. But one of the things too is, do you have any outstanding audit findings or monitoring findings? And so all that needs to be wrapped up as well. Whether or not that's a formal closeout monitoring or is just wrapped into the ordinary closeout process, it's kind of as a distinction without a difference. But just kind of keep in mind, there will be some level of effort that goes into closing out your subrecipient agreement. All right, which of the following monitoring events are optional? It's kind of a trick question. None of them. So if ADECA or HUD requests a monitoring, it's required, okay? All right, so now we're gonna go through the process, and I think this is it. So we kind of break it into three categories here. You've got your planning for the monitoring event, then what's called field work or the event itself, and then the response to the event. So during pre-monitoring, ADECA is preparing the strategy. The strategy is what exactly we're going to monitor, who's going, when is it, and we're going to schedule the event and send the letter. Then during the monitoring, we always kick off with what's called an entrance conference. So it's like, hey, how you doing? This is what we're going to do, yada, yada. Then we'll begin to perform the actual review of the files and perform the staff interviews. And once we're all done, we'll hold an exit conference, which will basically say, this is what we found. You have X amount of days to get us any other documentation we may not have received. Try to remedy any of this if we did find anything prior to us writing the report. We won't wait until that last day to be like, okay, guess what? You've got 8 problems now. We'll be talking to you throughout the process. We don't want there to be problems, so we want to say, hey, it looks like there's a problem here, and we want you to be given the opportunity to go and fix it or show us it's not an issue at all, okay? So that's the exit conference. Then we go back to the office and we draft and send the monitoring report. It outlines everything we found, good and bad. Then you'll work with your grant manager to develop what's called a management plan. It's not an overly constructed thing. It's just basically, talking to your grant manager about the report and saying, all right, this is how we're going to fix this one. This is when we're going to submit it to you, yada, yada. So you kind of come up with a plan. And once you resolve all your findings, then you get a letter from ADECA saying you're all done with that event, okay? So we'll go into this now, all of that in a little more detail. The strategy will identify the following, and so does the letter, I think. Yeah, so this is almost duplicative. So first it's ADECA identifying, okay, is it going to be an on-site or a remote event? What documentation do we need the subrecipient to submit prior to the event? So oftentimes that's things like policies and procedures, or if a procurement's involved, sending us your procurement information. If there is a bunch of beneficiaries involved, maybe it's an economic development loan program, we'll want to see a list of beneficiaries and the status of their applications so that we can do a random sample. So, there'll be different types of things we'll say, hey, we need this before we get there. We'll identify who on our team, ADECA, is going to be conducting the monitoring. We'll get the names and contact information of who is going to be participating on your end and who's kind of our POC. The date, times, and location of the monitoring, exactly what we'll be looking at, and then also what monitoring checklists we're going to use. The monitoring checklists are fashioned off of the CPD monitoring handbook. So they're, again, it's not revolutionary. It's basically exactly what HUD would use. And those are available on, I always forget the number, it's 4402 or something like that. Okay, it's online. And there's hundreds of them. But there's a specific chapter for CDBG and then also 2 CFR 200. So that's the strategy. It's like, okay, ADECA's coming. What are we going to do during this monitoring event and who's involved? Then we send the letter, and again, we're working with you on this, right? So we don't just send a letter one day and it's like, I hope you're available next Wednesday. We'll call and say, hey, we need to come out. This is the date we're thinking. Does that work for you? So the letter will identify everything that the strategy just described. So the type of event, the date and times, what we're going to be looking at, the documentation we need, any technical assistance that you would like or that we feel is necessary. We'll give you copies of the checklist we'll be using so you'll know the questions that we'll be asking. And so we want you to be prepared. The ADECA, contact information of ADECA staff, so you'll have your point of POC as well. The list of the files for sample, and if we're going to be on site, just a place that we can be, right? So that we can look at the files, if you have a conference room or something. There's an old adage, which is if you want your monitors to hurry up and get out of there, you put them in a dark, stuffy room and turn the AC off. But you won't do that to us, right? At HUD, they did do that to us. Yeah. All right. Grantees would do that to us. And we did want to get out of there. All right. So, is this the same thing? Oh, yeah. Okay, so so how do you prepare for a monitoring event? First, you want to look at that letter. The letter should say everything that you need to know. Then you're going to want to review all of your files for accuracy and completeness using the checklist. So kind of monitor yourself, if you will, right? Print or make readily available all your records, policies, procedures. The more you're prepared, it really does show your grant manager and ADECA that you are running efficiently, effectively, you know what you're doing, you're not kind of flying by the seat of your pants, right? So the better prepared you are, you give the impression that you know what you're doing and that you're managing this, properly. Get your staff ready. And make sure that they're available to answer any questions. They should know what ADECA, plans to look at, so that they're all kind of, in that mode. Okay, we're going to have to be answering some questions. And if you have any, areas of concern you don't necessarily want to review, get everybody prepped for that as well. Just like If they ask this question, point it to the director. And then remember, monitoring events are an opportunity to achieve compliance and are not meant to be negative or punitive. So again, I don't be combative. The idea is to be open and transparent so that we can get it right together. All right, so now we're in field work. The entrance conference will explain the purpose, the scope, and the schedule. We'll confirm, okay, who's who, when are they going to be available to answer these questions. And then if there are any physical inspections, we'll schedule those as well. So if you want to say like, hey, yeah, we got that project underway or completed, we're going to go take a look at it and see how amazing it is. And then also, verify what we're going to look at from a program perspective, whether it's housing, economic development, infrastructure, and then how to access the files. Are they digital? How do we get access to them? Or who do we ask if we can't find something? So pretty straightforward. You've got digital files, you've got paper files, digital files, paper files, or documents that are in systems. So again, you'll just want to make sure that if we need to look at something, we have access regardless of the type of format the file is in. Okay, so then we're going to do the review and the interviews. We always give you an opportunity right after the entrance conference to give us a presentation of where you're at. It's kind of like a status update. So you'll know exactly what we're monitoring. So you'll be given an opportunity to say, okay, here's where we're at. We've done 3 programs or 3 projects so far. Another 8 are in the pipeline. We think we're doing really well. As you know, this one has some delays, but it's back on track. Whatever it is you want to tell us, that's your opportunity to do so. And we want to hear it. We want to hear it. So that'll happen, and then we'll begin to go ahead and just get started. Typically what we do is we'll schedule meetings on all the topics in the monitoring event. So if we're looking at, for example, overall management, so just kind of overall stuff, capacity, website, we're going to look at financial management, we're going to look at procurement, and we're going to look at 2 projects. So we'll schedule a meeting for each of them so that we can begin to have that conversation. So like for if it's financial management, we'll say, all right, go ahead and let's get your financial staff in here. We're just going to start asking questions, kind of, casual conversation. Okay, so do you have your chart of accounts? We know that you've drawn $500,000 so far. Can you go ahead and get us that, that general ledger, and we'll identify some invoices we want to take a look at. Just simple, kind of casual, let's kind of get everybody up and running, if you will. And that'll get the conversation going, and it really does get your staff kind of on the ball, like, okay, they're starting to request stuff, so let's go find it. So that's kind of the interview part. And then it says maintain an ongoing dialogue. So we're going to keep you informed throughout the process. If I'm on the monitoring, I can't hide my feelings or opinions, so you'll know right away how I feel about something. Now, we, like I said, we want you to know if we have concerns so that you know how, hey, we need to show this is not a problem. Enable discussions or any problems encountered, providing the subrecipient with the opportunity to react immediately and minimize the potential for surprises, in the end. So again, we don't, at the end of the day, we have to write these monitoring reports, and then we have to follow up with you. So it's better to not have any problems at all for everybody, okay? These are the types of records to be reviewed. Financial, that includes invoices, contracts, purchase orders, timesheets, receipts, everything we talked about yesterday. Programmatic, so that's the actual programs themselves, applicants, income verifications, duplication of benefits, award calculations. Your cross-cutting, that's stuff like procurement, Davis-Bacon, Section 3, environmental. And then just administrative, right? So public notices, meetings, agendas, notes, correspondence. It could also be, hiring, project management, things like that, capacity. All right, so document review. Not only are we looking at files, financials, things like that, but we're comparing everything against your subrecipient agreement, so your budget, your scope of work, your deadlines, the actual deliverables that are in attachment A and attachment B, budget deliverables. Then we'll be also looking at your progress and performance reports. So they've reported they've done this. Let's go ahead and compare that to the actual files themselves. Any documentation provided by the ADECA grant managers to the subrecipients. So we're talking about any correspondence to and from. All of your reimbursement requests. And then any if we're in our second or third monitoring and there's open findings, or let's say a prior monitoring, there was an issue with income verification. So you weren't quite getting the LMI documentation right for income. So you went ahead and cleared that finding. It's no longer open, but we may want to go ahead and just follow up on that again because we knew it was an area of concern, right? So there's, your past monitoring results may inform, what we're looking at in the future. And then also, if you did have a single audit, we're more than likely to ask for that just to make sure that, there's nothing that we didn't find or we're about to find. Okay, so we're there for a couple of days. We're talking the whole time. We're looking at documents. You're getting a sense for what we're finding. And by the end, you really should not have any surprises at the exit conference. We'll tell you the night before. This is basically what we're looking at. So at the exit conference, it's a formal, we're at the end. So here's the preliminary results. Again, that's even the exit conference is not a sorry, pencils down type of meeting. It's we're presenting the preliminary results and establishing a clear understanding of what we found and what those next steps will be. Again, we'll give you an opportunity to correct any misconceptions or misunderstandings, and then secure additional information to clarify. So again, if there's, it's a short period of time. We do ask a lot during these monitorings, so you'll be working hard to get us everything we need. Unless everything's in order, then you won't have to work hard at all. But basically, that night before, you may have given us, a big document dump as we're headed into the meeting the next morning. So I've seen that before. So you may say, yeah, remember, that was an issue last night, but we found that document, so don't worry when you get a chance to look at it, it's there. And then provide an opportunity for subrecipient to report any steps taken to correct. So that's kind of what I just said. Like, oh yeah, we've got that in order. Okay, so also at that time, that's oftentimes when we say, all right, so it's Friday, you have until next Friday to get us anything else that's missing. So if you sent a bunch of documents Thursday evening and we haven't had a chance to look at them yet, we'll go ahead and look at them next Monday, Tuesday. If we need anything else, we'll let you know. And you'll have until Friday. And then by Friday, that's it, right? That's when we're gonna do pencils down. So you get like another week, if necessary. All right, so now we're gonna prepare the monitoring report. We'll summarize the results of the monitoring and the date that you must submit a response. It's typically 30 days. And there's 3 different types of results, right? So observations, findings, and concerns. An observation is just a comment, right? So it's not a concern, it's not an issue, a finding, but we're just kind of making, you did really well here. We see you've improved there. As we discussed, you may want to do X, Y, Z. It's not rising to any serious level, or it's not being, it's just saying this is what was discussed while we were there. The next kind of level in terms of intensity is a concern. So this is defined as a deficiency in program performance, which should be brought to your attention, because if it's not properly addressed, it may become an issue. It may become a finding. So it's not a problem right now, but we're concerned it might become a problem. Concerns are a way also for us to say, We didn't want to issue a finding here, but we do expect you to fix this, because if it's a problem when we come out next time, it will have to be a finding, okay? So it's kind of like a softball, if you will. And then a finding is, unfortunately, this is a problem, and it has to be formally rectified. If you get a finding, it's not the end of the world. It's not meant to be a black stain or anything like that. It's just meant to say, this is a problem that has to be rectified. Findings have to be tied to a statutory, regulatory, or programmatic requirement, right? So when you get a finding, it's going to say, you violated 2 CFR 200 336A, which states, right? So it's going to be very specific. It's not just like, we didn't like that. It's going to say, this is what the federal government says, and we tried our hardest to get this resolved. It didn't. No big deal. Let's get it fixed. And this is how you'll have to fix that. So then you'll work with ADECA to kind of work through it all. All right, again, having that verbal conversation that I prefer. All right, what do you really need out of this? This is what we can do. All right, yes, if you did that, that's what would fix this. Kind of just put that process together. And then you're going to actually have to submit a formal written response to each finding, concern as necessary, and it's all your documentation, right? So you'll just want that formal in a letter back and forth saying, for this finding, and it's your opportunity to refute the finding as well. We don't agree with you, you can say, for these reasons. Or, yeah, you said that, we're not really taking the blame, but here you go, here's what you asked for. Whatever you want to do. But that's what that process is, the back and forth until it's all resolved. If you get it all done in that first submittal, then we'll just issue a clearance letter and you're done. If you are able to clear most of it, but not all of it, there may be some back and forth until it's all resolved. Okay. So here it is, the clearance letter. You'll get an official letter that says, everything we found on that monitoring is done. Let's move on. And like I said, we can't close out the subrecipient agreement until all monitoring findings are addressed. All right. If you don't cooperate, if you just say, I don't feel like it, or I don't want to, if you don't respond and you're not communicating with your grant manager, and we don't think this will happen, but just FYI, if you don't respond within that 30 days or whatever it is, we'll have to issue a formal letter saying you have 15 days from this new letter to respond. And you'll also have to come meet with us in person, kind of talk about why didn't you respond to our letter. This is all, I hate to say all this is all not meant to be punitive. This is only necessary if you're just like not talking to us, okay? So there are rules and regulations in 2 CFR 200 in particular, and in the subrecipient agreement, which address the process for when things get fuzzy. So if you're not cooperating, you get a letter, you'll come meet in person. And if you just are not responding to these findings or not making an effort to resolve them, ADECA, against its desire, may be forced to suspend, terminate the agreement, okay? Again, that's really nothing any of us are thinking about. It's just the legal remedies that are available. Be kind of like if you're a contractor, if you had a consultant and they weren't doing what you said for them to do, you're not going to just keep paying them, right? Okay, prior to reduction, withdrawal, or adjustment, or any other actions, the subrecipient shall be notified. So again, we'll make every effort possible to say, hey, please don't make us do this before it finally happens. All right, I think this is it. True or false, once a subrecipient provides an initial response, no additional documentation will be requested. Yeah. All findings must be resolved prior to closeout, and so just because you respond to it doesn't mean that's satisfactory, right, or sufficient. We really do have to, on our end, on the ADECA end, say, yes, this in fact was resolved. And it all goes back to, at the end of the day, ADECA has to answer to HUD for everything you do. So it's not in our interest or, you know, to say, oh yeah, whatever, it doesn't matter what they did. Or let's just go ahead and cover that up. Because if HUD finds out, then we're on the hook. So if we told you it was fine, and later we go, just kidding, you know, then that's a problem for all of us. All right, that's it. What do you guys think? Not too bad? All right, good. All righty, that's that. Thank you.
All right, we've got record keeping, and then we'll be done. All right, I'll turn it over to Jackie. She's gonna be presenting record.
All right. Again, my name is Jacqueline. I'm the grant manager for the city of Mobile and Mobile County. We want to start off with the record keeping. So we're going to do the overview of record keeping, file management, types of records, access to records, records retention, record keeping resources. Record keeping is very important part of a successful program, and as Tyler stated yesterday, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. Okay, this training introduces the basic concepts of record keeping and records retention. Right. Record keeping is one of the most important aspects of CDBG DOR grant administration. Accurate record keeping is vital to ensure that the documentation for DOR is compliant with federal, state, local, and program requirements. And files must be complete and should be able to portray the DOR program's life from inception to completion. All right. So what we want to accomplish with this is we want to demonstrate compliance with all applicable laws, regulations, and requirements. We want to permit ADECA, HUD, and HUD Office of Inspector General, OIG, to successfully monitor or audit for compliance. We want to also allow the public and other stakeholders to review and measure the accomplishment and expenditures of the DR program. And we want to fully document financial transactions to ensure reimbursement of DR funds for eligible expenditures. So when I was a sub, I made sure that when I documented my financial transactions, I had everything from when they asked for the funds to when we cut the checks to when the checks cleared. So when they came to monitor, they can see that we were in compliance on getting the funds out in time, and we didn't have any lag in those days that when the funds were deposited for us to get them out to our contractors. Okay, and Tyler discussed this just a little while ago on the monitoring, the pass-through of the entities. You have the HUD with the certifications and grant agreement, the multiple regulations and acts. Then you have ADECA with the policies and procedures, training, oversight, and monitoring. And you have your subrecipients with the policies, procedures, and adherence of compliance. And these are the applicable laws and regulations that you can follow. 2 CFR 233.4, 233.8, 233.02, and 24 CFR 575.06, 490, 493, and then you have your Federal Register notices and ADECA program guidelines, grant administration manual, and sub-recipient agreements. And the grant administration manual, we're still working on that, but it should be completed, in the upcoming weeks. So next we're going to talk about the record keeping topics, which is a file management. DR recipients are the responsibility to collect and maintain records, the types of records that must be maintained, the access which permits federal and state agencies and the public access to records for monitoring, review, and audits. Your retention is the period that records must be maintained. Then your file management, we're gonna discuss the digital records, paper records, and the grant management system. We discussed this a little bit just a second ago, but your digital files managed and stored on local computers and servers, and your paper files managed and stored in local secure file cabinets. ADECA reporting transmitted via ADECA's reporting methods. Then your digital records, most common method for file management and record retention, file naming, organization, and version control are key to success. Easily accessible by stakeholders on site and remotely, if permitted. Must only be accessible to authorized users and protected against unauthorized access or malicious activity. So you want to make sure that when you're not using those files, they're locked. You know, your computer's locked, the file cabinets are locked. I've seen some that will actually say, oh, my file cabinet is locked, but the key is in the file cabinet. Make sure that key is not in the file cabinet. You know, it doesn't make sense, but make sure those keys are not in those file cabinets. Also, examples include data entered into systems, documents scanned, uploaded, and documents stored on local servers. And the paper records includes but is not limited to contract, bid documents, receipts, applications, and other records that require wet signatures. It must be kept in a locked file cabinet located in a secure and limited access area. Digital backups should be maintained in case of fire, flood, or theft. Now, with your digital files and your paper files, sometimes you may need a wet signature on a file and you may forget to scan it over into your digital file. So it's always good to take some time and just, you know, compare your paper files with your digital files to make sure you're not missing anything. Because if, you know, ADECA gets those files and you're missing something, but you have it in your paper files, it's just like you're not really keeping your records. I mean, we all can forget something, but it's best to take some time and just compare both your paper files and your digital files. Your file checklist, whether storing a digital copy of paper records, detailed file checklists are a great tool to ensure all required records are collected and stored in the proper location. Enable easy review both internally and by ADECA, HUD, and OIG during monitoring audit. And ADECA's reporting requirements, subrecipients will be required to submit the following documentation by the 10th of the month following the close of the reporting period. Progress report detailing progress made since the prior reporting period, invoices and supporting documentation to enable reimbursement of eligible CDBG-DR expenditures. So, here's a test your knowledge. What type of file would contract with a wet signature be considered as? Paper. And your internal accounting records? Invoice and supporting documents? There you go. Good job. All right, now types of records: financial, programmatic, cross-cutting, and administrative. Now, financial will consist of invoices, contracts, purchase orders, timesheets, receipts. Programmatic will be your applicant intake, income documents, DOB, awards calculations. Cross-cutting is procurement, Davis-Bacon, Section 3, environmental. Administrative is the public notice, meeting agendas, notes, correspondence. And then your financial records, current authorizations and obligations of DR funds, unobligated balances, funds remaining available for distribution. Assets and liabilities, program income, if any. Evidence indicating that each expenditure is necessary and reasonable, allowable, and I can't say that word, so It's always been a tongue tire for me. Okay. And, some invoice supporting documentation includes our payroll timesheets, payroll records, supplies and material, procurement records, receipts or invoices, proof of payments, invoice procurement records, contract purchase orders, and supporting documentation, proof of payment. Now, applicant, example of programmatic records is applicant intake, application, eligibility, household size, and income. Duplication of benefits, correspondence, and your award is your repair estimate, award calculation, constructions, your bids, your contracts, notice to proceeds. In your national objective and eligibility records, eligible activity, which would be your planning, your economic development, housing, rehab. National objective would be your low mod, your urgent needs, slum and blight. Then your nature and location of the activity, amount of DUR funds budgeted, obligated, and expended, and your proof of completion, your household assisted service and provided. You want to make sure that all these records are kept in order, so nobody has to like dig through them and try and figure them out. You know, they are actually 1, 2, 3 in step. So example of cross-cutting records. We touched on this a little while ago, is your environmental, which is the environmental review record, completed HUD forms, certifying official signatures. You have your procurement, your RFPQ or invitation for bids, proposals, scoring criteria, contract, notice to proceed. Your Section 3 is proof of contracting, employment opportunities is Section 3 residents. Your Davis-Bacon bid contract requirements, payroll records, wage restitution. In your fair housing and equal opportunity records. And now for fair housing and equal opportunity purposes as applicable, such records shall include data on the racial, ethnic, and gender characteristics of persons who are applicants for, participants in, or beneficiaries of the program. And ADECA must report FHEO data in the DRGR system at the activity level. So you guys want to make sure that you have are keeping good records on this as well. Other records to be maintained is the fair housing and equal opportunity, your race, ethnicity, and gender characteristics of persons served, your Uniform Relocation Act, acquisition, displacement, relocation, and replacement of housing records, citizen participation records. I know that one can be kind of hard because it's kind of hard to get people to participate if you're not giving them money right there on site, but you want to make every effort to document everything that you've done to try and get them to be a part of this process. Other records required by 24 CFR 570 subpart K. And another test your knowledge. So here, can you guys name some of the financial records? Okay. Invoices? I can't hear you. Okay. So here we go. Timesheets, payroll records, procurement records, receipts or invoices, proof of payment, contract and purchase orders. What about your programmatic side? Okay. There you go. Your application, your household size and income, duplication of benefits, correspondence, repair estimate, award calculation. So yeah. All right. And so I asked access to records, which is a monitoring and audit, public access. HUD OIG, the Comptroller General of the United States, and ADECA or any of their unauthorized representatives must have the right of access to any documents, paper, or other records of subrecipients which are pertinent to the CDBG-DR award in order to conduct monitoring and audits. The right also includes timely and reasonable access to the subrecipient's personnel for the purpose of interview and discussion related to such documents. And this information can be found at 2 CFR 200-337A. Subrecipients must provide citizens with reasonable access to records regarding the past use of DR funds consistent with ADECA or local requirements concerning the privacy of personal records, including personally identifiable information, PII. HUD's regulations at 24 CFR Part 15 describe the policies and procedures governing public access to records under the Freedom of Information Act. Certain DR records that are not publicly available may be subject to the FOIA, and this can be found at 24 CFR 570-490C2. And another test your knowledge. What documents must be made available during an ADECA or federal monitoring audit? Any document, papers, or other records of subrecipients which are pertinent to the CDBG-DR award. That's correct. And our records retention. We're going to discuss our record retention period exceptions, retaining, transferring of records. Subrecipients must maintain files for 5 years after the grant closed out with HUD, not ADECA SRA. This requirement applies to all documents retained by the subrecipient, not those transmitted to ADECA. Certain exceptions may extend the record retention period, which we'll discuss in the next slide. All right, so the exceptions are audits that started before the end of the 5-year period, or HUD notifies ADECA in writing to extend the retention period, and the receipt of program income after the period of performance, or real property monitoring. Retaining and transferring records, submit and or enter records directly into ADECA's grant management system, and you'll transfer to ADECA all documents related to the DR program at closeout. Another test your knowledge. True or false? Subrecipients must retain records for 5 years after the closeout of the subrecipient agreement with ADECA. Good job, you guys for listening. So it's false. Subrecipients must maintain files for 5 years after the closeout of the ADECA grant agreement with HUD. All right, and we're at the record keeping resources. And these are some resources that if you have any questions, during our kickoff meeting, we will discuss more in detail about the record keeping process and the files that gonna be good for you to maintain for your monitoring in the event you have to be monitored. We'll discuss more of that in our kickoff meeting. But here are some record keeping resources if you guys have any questions or need to just want to look it up and just read it. These are some good record keeping resources. And I know this went a little fast. It went faster than I thought it was supposed to. But do you guys have any questions? Any questions? Wait a minute, y'all look like y'all ready to go. Well, if y'all have, you don't have any questions? Thank you, guys.
are done. Do you guys have any questions now that we've finished up all of these while we're here? And we can, because we do have a little bit of time. We ended like very early. So if you guys want to ask questions, you're welcome to. If you want to think of it and then come back later.
The access to the DRGR system is this similar to getting access to the IEIS, where it's just a form and
Yes, and I don't know if subrecipients are going to be entering into the DRGR system. I think that's just ADECA. Yeah, and so what subrecipients will be doing is submitting all information to ADECA, to the grant managers, and then ADECA will put it into DRGR. Right, yeah. So you guys don't have to worry about that. And at this moment, ADECA doesn't have a grant management system like electronically, so right now we're just doing things by email. We're working on developing some forms for submission of reports and invoices and all of that. So when subrecipient agreements are signed, I know some of you have them, and we'll be meeting with you about invoicing and reporting and all of that. For those of you who don't have the subrecipient agreements executed yet, that's coming, because we'll meet with you guys each whenever we execute those agreements and go over the invoicing process, the reporting process, the forms that you guys will need to have to submit on the reporting schedule. So, yeah. Anything else? Ryan, you got something? Okay. Okay, great. Well, if you guys think of anything or you have questions, you are more than welcome to reach out. You have my email address, you have your grant manager's email addresses, phone numbers, I'm sure. So feel free to reach out to us. Trent, you can also reach out to Trent. You have his information. So we welcome any and all questions, and we'll try to help you guys out. Thanks for coming, and for those of you who are traveling, safe travels back.
Thank you.